The 24 photographs in this slideshow were selected from some several hundred, all taken within a period of 9 months. The subject is old buildings in England, and in fact all of them are listed buildings, except for the Standing Stone, which is a scheduled monument. Hardly inappropriate for something that has been there for over 3,000 years. The photos were collecting dust for quite a few years, until the Society for the Protection of Ancient Buildings asked me to give a talk at one of their events. It was during my preparation for this presentation that I reviewed my photographs from the 9-month peregrination around England. All architects, I imagine, take photographs of buildings as a way of making notes about things they have seen. Their photographs are part of their understanding of architecture. In the case of old buildings, such a collection of photographs cannot become a catalogue of ideas to mine at will, if only for the simple reason that building technology is not at all the same these days. But the collection of photographs is a catalogue of curiosity. Looking again at my photographs, I posed myself the question, why did I take this or that photo? It was hardly ever as a photographer. I could frequently see the technical reason, or what history had to say. But what was interesting was when I had learned something new about architecture, something you couldn't learn in the academy. I began to select the photographs that meant most to me, and gradually refined the selection into the 24 you see here. Subsequently, I decided to write 24 essays and title the collection A Photographic Notebook. I wanted to use my 24 photos as a vehicle to explain to myself in words why I thought my photographs were important. Why did they energize me? What thoughts did they provoke? The subject matter and the concise 9 months for the batch of photographs came from being awarded a scholarship by the Society for the Protection of Ancient Buildings. To my surprise, I was called a scholar. For 6 months, 3 of us crisscrossed England together, visiting historic buildings under repair. We met people that contributed with every skill conceivable to the effort of respectfully keeping old buildings in use, and they all gave their knowledge freely, gladly, and passionately. This organised period was followed by 3 months of individual study. I used it to plot a course walking from London to Cirencester, stopping to draw for 10 days at half a dozen carefully chosen buildings, Blenheim Palace among them. For 2 of them, I designed a new sundial. I would say that the intense exposure to all these historic buildings made it clear to me that context is far more important than form. Their geographical, cultural, political, religious, intellectual and economic contexts produced these buildings. How peculiar that in the 19th century the style of a construction was of overriding importance, as if making a window head a so-called Gothic arch was giving you access to spirituality, or a Greek column somehow making the state more benign. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, and all of these buildings, except the Royal Pavilion at Brighton, are just that. All buildings used low-energy materials. From the clay palaces of Babylon, to the pyramids, to the Greek temples and on, buildings were made from locally scavenged materials. Although there are, of course, spectacular exceptions, such as the Preseli stones used as part of Stonehenge, somehow transported to Wiltshire from the tip of southern Wales. Or the example here of Norwich Cathedral, built just after the Norman conquest, with a facing stone transported from near Caen across the Channel by barge. The format that I developed for my photographic notebook placed the photograph beside a brief history of the building in question. This contextual positioning often gives clues as to why the image means something to me. You can see here that each building is annotated with its location and the earliest known date of its construction, not forgetting that the date is no more than the beginning of the building's story. For example, Westminster Abbey, part of a Benedictine monastery founded in 1050, before William the Conqueror, has been modified in some way, probably every century or so. And so it is for most historic buildings. They do not stand still forever in aspic, providing they have a use. A constant in history is each generation's belief that it is superior to previous generations. What is no longer constant, however, as a result of industrialization, is building technology. Up until reinforced concrete appeared, all changes to the Abbey were made using exactly the same technology as was used at its initial construction. It is this technology, which uses basic, minimally converted natural materials, that produced a relative visual harmony in building constructions over 3,000 years. My own starting point is Knossos, 1250 BC. This harmony was because everything was built within the constraints of the nature of the materials, whatever your style. Our synthetic materials do not pose the same constraints, allowing visual chaos, enthusiastically supported by individualism. If we say that the Abbey is 1,000 years old and reinforced concrete 100 years old, for 90% of its life, modifications made to the Abbey were carried out using the appropriate technology. And appropriate technology requires appropriate craftsmanship. The historic shift that puts human labour at an increasingly higher cost has already forced mass production down our throats, making anything made by hand appear unaffordable or as a luxury. Yet somehow, for the time being, we still honour our historic buildings with the same building technology used in their origination. When I was at university, I had a landscaping project in which I explored some woodland. Part of the analysis led me to a hollow where the trees and other vegetation grew in an entirely different manner to the rest of the wood. This observation led me to scrutinise the sun path diagram and discover that this hollow never ever received direct sunlight. It wasn't long before I inverted the sun path diagram and was designing sundials, which I continue to do. Indeed, during my travels around England as a scholar, I was also a sundial spotter, noting and photographing 120 sundials, which became a significant kick-off for the listing in the then newly formed British Sundial Society. The significance of understanding so intimately the movement of the sun gave a different dimension to the appreciation of our buildings, which has been of immense value in designing new buildings or modifying existing buildings. All of the buildings in this slideshow were built when there was no electric light. Many people marvel at the Sistine Chapel ceiling, so painstakingly restored and now brilliantly illuminated. Poor old Michelangelo never saw it so clearly. He and his team frescoed gloomily all day long. This sense of light that I developed is far more subtle than acres of glass, which is too often the default for modernist design. Sunlight in particular demonstrates the uniqueness of place, and no well-designed building shows ignorance of the sun's movement. Overall, my favourite photograph among this group of 24 was taken in the bell tower of St Mary's Church in Sevington. Perhaps not remarkably, it was in the first week of the 6 months of study. The sunlight has penetrated a small opening and falls on a trapdoor. It is through the trapdoor that the bells are lowered and raised for fitting and maintenance. Around the trapdoor are the guides for the ropes passing through the floor from the ringing chamber below to the bells above.